My name is Olivia Hart, and last year, on the day I graduated from Harvard Law, my parents were 2,000 miles away clapping for my sister in a beauty pageant instead of for me. I stood on that stage alone, in my crimson gown, while the seat with their names on it stayed empty. That was the moment I quietly decided to cut them out of my life. But when my cousin's Instagram post about my speech went viral back home in Abilene, everything exploded: the church gossip, the family fights, the tears, the silence. Funny how the day they ignored me was also the day the whole town finally saw me. Have you ever had to walk away from your own family to find peace? Tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there so I know I'm not alone right now. I was born and raised in Abilene, a small town tucked in the heart of Texas, where everyone knows each other's names from Sunday church services, breakfast diners that serve pancakes until nearly noon, and rumors that travel faster than the prairie wind. In that little town, my family was always considered the perfect household. My mother, Linda Hart, had once been Miss Texas back in the 1980s. She always believed that crown was a family legacy, something sacred that had to be preserved, even passed down. She spoke of it as if it were a holy duty, and I, her eldest daughter, was the disappointment who failed to inherit it. My father, Robert Hart, was gentle, a quiet man who owned a small auto repair shop down the street. He lived on calloused hands, sweat, and silence. He never raised his voice, never contradicted my mother. He handled everything with the same phrase: "Let it be, live." When I was little, it sounded like comfort. But as I grew older, I realized it was surrender. Then came Savannah. I was 6 when she was born, and just a few weeks later, my mother was already telling the neighbors, "She's got dimples, just like I did at her age." Soon she began collecting ruffled dresses, miniature high heels, and sparkling plastic tiaras for Savannah long before my sister could even speak. Meanwhile, I had books. Old ones my father found at garage sales every weekend because, as he said, Liv loves to read. He was right. I could sit for hours in the school library, reading about scientists, galaxies, and people who had gone farther than others dared to see. But to my mother, that kind of passion held no worth. She would say, "You need to learn how to smile like Savannah, Olivia. You always look like you just failed an exam." I tried to smile, God knows I tried, but my forced grin only made her sigh. As we grew older, the difference between us became impossible to miss. I was tall, thin, dark-haired, my eyes always drifting down when I spoke. Savannah was sunshine blonde, sun-kissed, and effortlessly confident. Mother enrolled her in dance classes, posture lessons, smile training, and child pageant photo shoots. I stood on the sidelines, fastening her dress buttons or carrying her tiny heels. Once, I overheard my mother say to a friend, "Savannah's got stage presence. Olivia's smart, sure, but girls need more than that." She said it so casually, yet it slammed shut the last door of my childhood, the one where I'd once believed that if I just tried hard enough, maybe I too could be loved the same way. I still remember the day of the state academic excellence ceremony. I was 12 years old, chosen to deliver the student representative speech. I had practiced all week, rehearsing every line until I could say it in my sleep. That morning, I put on the simplest dress my mother had ever bought me, the only piece of clothing I owned that wasn't a hand-me-down from Savannah. I woke up early, brushed my hair neatly, and looked around the house. The sofa was empty. My mother's room, empty too. On the kitchen table lay a crumpled note written in her familiar looping handwriting. "Taking Savannah to Dallas for a photo shoot. Do your best, honey." No one came with me that day. I rode my bike to school alone, clutching the certificate that trembled in my hands. When the audience applauded, all I could hear was the hollow echo in my head. I glanced down at the rows of parents snapping pictures, hugging their kids, proud smiles shining under the gym lights, and that was the first time I understood. Sometimes, no matter how hard you try, effort isn't enough to make someone look your way. That night, my mother called. Her voice was cheerful, glowing. "Did you see Savannah's photo on the cover of the local magazine? Isn't she stunning?" I replied softly, "I got my award today." There was a brief pause, then she said, "That's wonderful, sweetheart. I'm proud of both my girls." And she hung up. I sat there holding the phone long after the screen went black, staring at my reflection, just me and the quiet silhouette of a girl unseen by anyone. From that day on, I stopped telling my mother about my awards or achievements. I learned to celebrate myself in small, quiet ways. A cup of hot cocoa after every exam, a new book whenever I scored well. I started keeping a journal, writing down every little thing that made me proud because no one else would. My father sometimes left a few folded bills on my desk. He never said a word, just gave a small nod when our eyes met. I knew that was his way of saying, "I see you." But in that house, his voice was always too soft to drown out the click of my mother's heels, the laughter of Savannah, and the relentless flash of her camera. I entered high school in silence, the same way I had existed in that house for years. Abilene High wasn't big, but to me, it felt like an entirely new world. There, no one knew I was the daughter of a former Miss Texas. No one compared me to Princess Savannah. I was simply Olivia Hart, the girl in the front row whose hand shot up whenever a teacher asked a question. I fell in love with chemistry, joined the debate club, and cherished the feeling of being heard for my ideas instead of my smile or the dress I wore. I still remember when my teacher handed me my first science scholarship letter and said, "You've got the kind of mind that goes far, Olivia. Don't ever let anyone make you think otherwise." I smiled at her words, but deep inside, a quiet fear stirred, the fear that no matter how far I went, my mother's eyes would never see me. At home, the living room wall had changed. The family portraits that once hung there were gone, replaced by framed photos of Savannah at beauty pageants, glittering gowns, flawless smiles, stage lights reflecting off my mother's beaming face in the audience below. My mother spoke about her as if she were the family's only hope, the one to carry on the Hart legacy. Every morning, I would stand in front of those pictures, surrounded by the lingering scent of perfume and makeup powder, realizing I had become nothing more than a shadow in the very house I grew up in. One night, I overheard my parents arguing softly in the kitchen. "You know Olivia's tuition fund was meant for her," my father said quietly. "Ruth left it to her, not for you to spend on Savannah." My mother's voice turned cold and sharp. "Olivia has scholarships, Robert. She doesn't need dresses or coaches, Savannah does. She needs investment. She can go much farther if we help her." I stood frozen by the door, my hands clenched white. Every dollar my grandmother Ruth had left me, the only thing she wanted me to use for college, had turned into posture lessons, catwalk training, and sparkling evening gowns for my sister. That night, I confronted my mother. I tried to sound calm, but my voice trembled anyway. "Mom, the money Grandma left me, that was for college, right? I need to pay my application fees this fall." She looked up, not at me, and replied coolly, "You don't need clothes, Olivia. You need knowledge, and you already have scholarships. Savannah is different. She needs to be prepared to shine." That word "shine" echoed in my head all night like a sentence being passed. It meant that I didn't. And maybe I never would shine enough to be loved. My father said nothing. He just sat at the table, staring into his coffee mug, silent as always. But it was that silence that hurt the most. Because when he said nothing, it meant he had chosen her side. I didn't need him to defend me, I just needed him to acknowledge that it was wrong. But he never did. The only person who still truly saw me was my grandfather, Walter. He had been a judge in Austin, stern, but kind in his own quiet way. Whenever he came to visit, he'd ask about my classes, the books I was reading, the debate tournaments I joined. Once, when I told him my mother had used my college fund for Savannah, he looked at me for a long moment and said, "You don't need to shine to have worth, Olivia. You just need to stay whole." I asked softly, "But what if no one sees me, Grandpa?" He smiled, placed his hand gently on my shoulder, and said, "I see you." However, when I turned 16, my birthday came and went in silence. Dad forgot. Mom was busy taking Savannah to Houston for the Miss Teen Abilene competition. I ate a single cupcake I'd bought from the convenience store on my way home. When I opened the mailbox, there was a small card inside thick paper, written in my grandfather's familiar cursive. For the girl they don't see but I do. I read that line over and over again, dozens of times. Not because it was poetic, but because, for the first time, someone had named the truth of my pain, the girl they don't see. I tucked that card into my notebook and carried it with me for years, a quiet reminder that I still existed, even when no one else seemed to believe it. Savannah kept winning titles, becoming more famous around town. Mom hired professional photographers, launched a fan page, and every time someone asked about me, she'd say, "She's grown now, focused on her studies." Not everyone's meant for the stage. I knew what she really meant, that I was the boring child. But what hurt the most wasn't being compared, it was being forgotten. I could live with Mom loving Savannah more. What I couldn't bear was her acting like I was invisible. High school came and went. I became the smart girl every teacher trusted, the one they could count on. But I stopped sharing my achievements at home. I tucked every certificate and medal into a drawer and stopped waiting for anyone to ask. Sometimes, Dad would scribble a short note on the back of a receipt, "I'm proud of you." I'd thank him, but I never kept them. I didn't want to live off the crumbs of comfort. What I wanted just once was for my mother to turn her head and truly see me. But that day never came. And slowly, I stopped waiting. I poured everything into one goal: to leave Abilene. I didn't know where I'd go, only that if I stayed, I'd be buried under the label of Miss Teen Abilene's sister. When Savannah wore her crown on stage, Mom cried tears of pride. I stood behind the curtain, watching the blinding lights wash over them, and whispered to myself, "One day, I'll stand somewhere people have to see me not for my smile, but for who I am. And when that day comes, I won't need anyone to stand beside me." The day I received my acceptance letter from Harvard Law School, I must have read it dozens of times. Every word seemed to glow on the page, trembling in my hands. I, Olivia Hart, the girl from the small town of Abilene, Texas, daughter of a mechanic and a former beauty queen, was about to become the first person from our town ever accepted into Harvard. I thought, this time, she'll finally be proud of me. I ran inside, my heart pounding so hard it hurt to breathe. Mom was in the kitchen, blow-drying Savannah's hair. I placed the letter on the counter, my voice shaking. "Mom, I got into Harvard." Savannah reacted first, not out of joy, but surprise. "Seriously, Harvard? Isn't that the school where people study forever just to argue?" They both laughed. But over the sound of their laughter, I only heard my mother's slow, measured words. "Being a lawyer is fine, Olivia, but beauty opens more doors than logic ever will. You should learn to make people love you, not just obey rules." I stood still, feeling the joy that had barely bloomed inside my chest tighten and collapse. I thought that this time, she'd finally say, "I'm proud of you." But no, it was the same story again. I didn't have the light. I didn't have the presence. And so, to her, everything I achieved would always just be paper, nothing more. A few days later, we had a celebratory dinner. But it felt like every other dinner we'd ever had. Mom spent the entire meal talking about Savannah's new dress fitting, the upcoming pageant judges, and whether a red or blue gown would look better under stage lights. I sat quietly, watching the candle flicker between us, thinking about the years ahead in a faraway place where no one knew me as Miss Teen Abilene's sister. When dinner ended, Mom patted my shoulder and said, "Well, it's good, I suppose. Having a lawyer in the family could come in handy someday." It sounded like congratulations, but it was colder than goodbye. The day I left Abilene, the August heat was suffocating. I packed 2 small suitcases, one for clothes, one for books, and stepped out onto the porch. Mom and Savannah were outside taking pictures in the bright sunlight. I thought they'd walk me to the car, but when I approached, Mom only said, "Remember to carry yourself properly. Harvard expects decorum." "How?" Savannah giggled and lifted her phone. "Let me post a photo of us saying goodbye." What I didn't know was that the moment I walked out the gate, she posted a different picture, just her and Mom, at breakfast, with the caption, "Breakfast with the only 2 real women of the Hart family." That photo got hundreds of likes. And in that single moment, I finally understood I had been erased from their picture long before I ever left. Before getting on the bus to the airport, my father handed me an envelope. "Your grandfather sent this," he said quietly, avoiding my mother's eyes. Inside was a handwritten letter, the ink slightly shaky. "Olivia, let the world see that you don't need anyone else's spotlight to be seen, because the real light is already within you." I held the letter tightly, feeling as though a single, fragile thread still connected me to the idea of home, but only through him. As the bus began to move, I looked out the window one last time. My mother was fixing Savannah's hair. My father stood with his arms crossed, staring at the ground. Neither of them waved. The long flight from Dallas to Boston felt like a border between two lives. When the plane descended, I looked out the window to see the world covered in snow white, endless, and so cold it seemed to slice through the skin. I had never seen snow before, and the moment I stepped out of the terminal, I was struck by a silence so pure it almost echoed. It was a different kind of silence. In Abilene, silence meant being forgotten. In Boston, silence meant possibility. I dragged my two small suitcases through the snowy steps, each foot sinking deep but firm. When the wind whipped across my face, I thought of my grandfather's words. "You don't need anyone's light." And for the first time in years, I smiled. Not the kind of smile my mother wanted, but the smile of someone who knew that even alone, she was moving in the right direction. That evening, I arrived at the student dorms, a small room with a low ceiling and walls faded by time. I placed my grandfather's letter on the desk, beneath the warm glow of the desk lamp. In that moment, the difference between Abilene and this place became crystal clear. Here, no one knew who I was. No one cared whether I had presence or poise. Here, the only currency that mattered was intellect and effort. I opened the window and watched the snow falling over the old rooftops of Harvard Yard, whispering to myself, "I won't live to be seen anymore. I'll live so that no one can look away." That night, I wrote the first line in a new notebook. Day 1 in Boston. A new chapter, no one beside me, but no one in my way. And in the sound of the wind slipping through the window cracks, I knew for the first time in my life I was truly free. The first years at Harvard felt like stepping into another world, a world where everyone spoke about their future with terrifying certainty, where the children of powerful families debated whether they should intern at the federal courthouse or at their father's law firm. And then there was me, Olivia Hart, from Abilene, Texas, a place where a girl's worth was measured by her curves and her smile. At Harvard, worth was measured by ability, and I was determined to prove I belonged. But sometimes, standing beneath those centuries-old arches or sitting in the stillness of Langdale Library, I couldn't shake the feeling that I didn't quite belong, not because of where I came from, but because I carried the invisible scars of a child who'd grown up unseen. I spent most of my days buried in the library, staying up until dawn perfecting every essay. The air was thick with the smell of strong coffee, the rhythmic clatter of keyboards, and the cold breath of Boston seeping through the old window frames. My savings barely covered my dorm room and simple meals, so I worked part-time in a research office, grading papers for a constitutional law professor. Every dollar I earned felt like one small step closer to freedom. I never complained. I was used to surviving on my own, from meals to sleepless nights, from comforting myself to believing in myself. Calls from home were rare, and when they came, they left an echoing emptiness behind. My mother never asked how I was doing, she only talked about Savannah. "Your sister got accepted into the Miss Texas training program. They say she has national potential," she said once, her voice brimming with pride. I listened, nodded, and turned back to the thick stack of case files on my desk. The last time she'd asked me anything that truly mattered about me was probably when I was 12. Now, I was just the silent audience to the story of the dazzling younger daughter of the Hart family. So I built my own rhythm: mornings for lectures, afternoons for work, evenings for reading, weekends for laundry and reheated soup. My classmates called me the quiet Harvard girl, But I felt safe inside my solitude. Here, no one compared me to anyone else. Silence was no longer punishment, it was oxygen. Then Ethan Wells appeared. He was a second-year med student who often sat in the small coffee shop near campus, the same one where I liked to study. One afternoon, I dropped a pile of case files, and he knelt to help me pick them up. "You study law?" he asked, smiling. "You look more like someone preparing to sue the entire world than to write an essay." I laughed a real laugh, my first in months. We started talking, and to my surprise, he didn't seem bored by my seriousness. He told me he'd chosen medicine because he wanted to heal what people can't see. I remember pausing for a long moment before replying softly, "So do I, just with words and the law." We became close friends. Ethan never pried into my past, he simply showed up when I needed him. He used to say, "You're not cold, Olivia. You're just used to no one touching the world inside you." For the first time in my life, I felt seen without needing to stand under any spotlight. Meanwhile, Savannah was turning into an online phenomenon. My mother had created a fan page called Olivia Hart, the Miss Texas Journey, updating every photo shoot, every catwalk session, every new designer dress. Each post drew hundreds of adoring comments. When I sent her a photo of me standing in Harvard Yard, wearing my crimson gown and smiling faintly, she reacted with a simple thumbs-up emoji. That was all. Her world had no place for me, or if it did, I was just a background character, fading quietly behind the glow of the stage lights. One evening, after a long day of exams, my phone buzzed with a video call from her. Her face appeared on the screen, perfectly made up, and behind her, Savannah was twirling in front of a mirror, trying on another gown. "You look exhausted," my mother said, frowning. "All that studying, is it really worth it if no one even notices? Savannah's just been offered a brand partnership, you know. See? A smile can open more doors than any degree." I forced a small smile. "I know, Mom." She chatted a bit more about Savannah, then hung up abruptly. "It's time for our photo shoot," she said before the screen went dark, leaving me alone again in the quiet glow of my laptop screen. I stared at my reflection on the dark screen, my tired eyes rimmed with shadows, reflecting the yellow light of the desk lamp. The smile still lingered on my lips, but at some point, tears had started falling without my noticing. I swallowed hard, the way I had learned to do all these years. I wasn't angry anymore, just tired. Tired of trying to prove my worth to people who never wanted to see it. Ethan showed up a little later, holding 2 cups of hot cocoa. He didn't ask anything, he just placed one in front of me. "I think," he said softly, "people don't have to see you for you to shine, they just need to step out of their spotlight long enough to notice you've been standing there all along." I didn't reply. I just nodded. And in that moment, I realized, real care isn't loud, or performative, or demanding. It's quiet, but it's there. I kept studying, kept working, and little by little, I began to change. Not because Harvard transformed me, but because I finally started to believe that I deserved everything I had worked for, even if no one applauded. Somewhere deep inside, I could still hear my grandfather's voice. "You don't need anyone's light." And, this time, I believed him. At the end of my 3rd year at Harvard, when the last traces of snow melted over the old brick pathways, I received the news I had won the award for outstanding thesis on women's rights. My professor said it was rare for a 3rd-year student to win. Around the same time, I was offered a summer internship at one of Boston's top law firms, Parker and Whitmore, known for training many of the country's most influential legal minds. I remember sitting in the library for a long time, staring at the glowing email on my laptop screen. What I felt wasn't pride, it was relief. Relief that all the sleepless nights, the bitter coffee, and the quiet humiliations had finally meant something. I thought, maybe this time, Mom will finally be proud. So I wrote an email to my parents. "I've been selected for Parker and Whitmore's summer program, one of the top law firms in Boston. They also published my paper on women's rights on the school's official page. Just wanted to share some good news." I hit send, then waited like a child hoping to be praised. 2 days passed. Nothing. On the third day, my mother finally replied. Good. By the way, Savannah just made it to the Miss Texas semifinals. I reread that message over and over again, not for what it said, but for what it didn't. It was so empty, it almost made me laugh. She was still the same. Never really listening. Always comparing. As if my success could never stand on its own, it always had to exist in the shadow of Savannah's spotlight. I didn't reply. I just closed my laptop and went back to work. But that night, when Ethan stopped by, I told him everything, my voice trembling even though I tried to hide it. He was quiet for a long moment before saying softly, "Do you realize something? Your mom has never really seen you and she probably never will. But that doesn't make you smaller, Olivia. It just proves your light shines too far for them to see." I didn't know what to say. So I smiled because if I didn't, I would have cried. That summer, I decided to go back to Texas for a short visit. I thought maybe it was time to make peace with my family or, at least, to try one last time. When the plane landed, the dry Abilene heat hit my face, and the familiar scent of dust and sun filled the air. Everything looked the same. Only I had changed. In my bag was a framed photo of me with my professor at Harvard, a small gift I wanted to give my mother. Not to boast, but to share a piece of the life she'd never cared to ask about. When I stepped inside the house, the air was filled with laughter and loud pop music. The living room was decorated with balloons, a large cake, and a glittering banner that read, "Congrats, Savannah, Miss Texas semi-finalist." I stood at the doorway, still holding my suitcase. No one noticed me until my father turned around, startled. "Olivia, you're home. Your mom and sister are celebrating Savannah's big win." I nodded, forcing a smile, but inside I felt the same cold emptiness I had felt the first time I stepped into a Boston winter. All evening, I sat at the dining table, listening to everyone talk about evening gowns, stage lights, judges, and marketing strategies for the next round. Mom floated around the room with a glass of wine, describing every second of Savannah's onstage moment in vivid detail. No one asked about Harvard. No one asked about my award, or Boston, or anything that had to do with me. I tried to join the conversation, quietly saying, "I actually have some good news too. I got accepted for an internship at Parker and Whitmore." Mom smiled faintly, as if she'd just heard about a stranger. "That's nice, dear, but you look tired. You should go rest. Oh, and Olivia, you should learn to smile more naturally, like Savannah. Confident women know how to shine." I sat still, the spoon in my hand trembling slightly. Maybe I'd stopped hoping for her approval long ago, but hearing those words still hurt as if it were the very first time. Before going to my room, I took the photo from my bag and placed it on the dining table. "I brought this for you," I said quietly. "So you'd know I've achieved something too." "Oh, Lou." She glanced at it, picked it up briefly, then nodded. "You should smile brighter in pictures, Olivia. You look too serious, like you're about to put someone on trial." She laughed. Savannah laughed too. And I just sat there, watching the room spin. In that moment, I finally understood there would never come a day when I was enough to be recognized. Not because I lacked anything, but because they never wanted another successful daughter. They only wanted one who fit the image they'd already chosen. Late that night, I sat on the porch, watching the party lights fade inside the house. The wind swept across the open fields, carrying with it the dry scent of dust and lavender. I thought of my grandfather, Walter, of the way he looked at me. He never saw me through grades or appearances, but through a silence that understood everything. The next morning, I went to visit him. He had aged, his hair a cloud of silver now, but his eyes were still warm. I told him about Harvard, about Mom, about Savannah. He listened quietly, then said one sentence I would remember for the rest of my life. "One day, they'll see what they've lost, Olivia, but when that day comes, don't be there to hear the apology." I said nothing, just sat there, feeling something between sorrow and release. Maybe, in that moment, I understood that love and recognition don't always come together. And sometimes, the only way to protect yourself is to stop needing to be seen at all. When I left his house, the Texas sun was setting, painting the sky a deep crimson. I knew that from then on, every step I took would be one step farther from Abilene. But also one step closer to myself. My final year at Harvard came faster than I expected. The small room in Cambridge that had once felt cold and empty was now filled with towers of books, stacks of drafts, and papers covered in red ink. For 6 months, I had poured my heart into my thesis. Women's Rights in the Modern Workplace. It wasn't just a research paper, it was a manifesto. A message to every woman who had ever been judged by her appearance, overlooked, or silenced. I wrote it as if I were writing to the 12-year-old version of myself. The girl who once stood alone on a stage, holding her award, with no one in the audience to see her. When my professor told me I had been selected to deliver the graduation speech, the entire room erupted. My classmates cheered. Ethan hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. He said, "You deserve this more than anyone." I smiled, but inside, one thought echoed through me. Maybe this time, they'll come. That night, I wrote an invitation to my family. The message was simple. The graduation ceremony will take place on June 10th at Harvard Yard. I hope you can be there. It's the most important milestone of my life. I attached 2 round-trip plane tickets I'd bought with my own savings from my part-time jobs. Then I hit send. And waited. Just like I always had. 2 days later, my mother's message arrived. June 10th is the same day as the Miss Texas Finals. Savannah has been preparing all year for this, you understand. I read it over and over. My eyes stopped on the last 2 words, you understand. As if understanding, sacrificing, and making peace had always been my job. I stared at the screen until the letters blurred into one another. Then I typed 2 words back, "Yes, Mom." Ethan walked into the room just as I folded the invitation shut. He didn't ask. He didn't have to. I placed it in my desk drawer next to my grandfather Walter's old letter and the 16th birthday card he once sent me. All the little things that had once made me believe they might someday be proud of me now just relics of hopes that had long expired. That night, I wandered through Harvard Yard. Summer cicadas buzzed between the old trees, their song mingling with the soft rustle of banners being hung. Rows of folding chairs lined the lawn, flags of crimson swayed gently in the evening wind. I stood there for a long time, watching the workers set up the stage, imagining the section marked family. I knew there would be an empty seat. Maybe 2. A few days later, I called my grandfather. His voice was hoarse but still warm. "I heard you're giving the speech," he asked. I smiled, though my eyes burned. "Yes, but I don't think they'll come." Ah. There was silence on the other end for a while. Then he said quietly, "Olivia, sometimes the people who should be proud of you are the last to recognize your worth. But that doesn't mean you've taken the wrong path. I'll be there. I'll be the one who stands when they stay seated." His words caught in my throat. I didn't cry, but something inside me clenched tight. He had always been the only one who never needed proof of who I was. The final days before graduation were a blur of drafts and rewrites. I kept editing my speech, writing, erasing, writing again, searching for words strong enough to carry the weight of it all. The story of a girl once forgotten in her own home, now standing on one of the most celebrated lawns in the world. The night before the ceremony, Ethan showed up at my door with a bouquet of white roses. "Do you want me to sit with your family tomorrow?" he asked gently. I smiled and shook my head. "Just sit somewhere I can see you," I said. "That's enough." The morning of graduation, Harvard Yard glowed red and gold beneath the early summer Sunday. Banners fluttered in the wind. The brass band played triumphantly between bursts of laughter, footsteps, and the endless flash of cameras. I sat among rows of crimson-robed graduates, the fabric heavy across my shoulders, the light warm and dazzling enough to sting my eyes. Every few seconds, a name was called, and families rose to cheer, waving flowers, shouting, "We're proud of you." And me, I sat still. Quiet. My hands clasped tightly in my lap as I stared toward the audience. The seats reserved for my parents were empty. A soft gust of wind brushed past, rustling the edge of the name card in front of me. Hart, Olivia. I tried to smile, but my throat closed up. Amid hundreds of claps and cheers, there was a strange pocket of silence, one that belonged only to me. A silence where no one looked, no one called, no one stood. Then, in the crowd behind, I saw Ethan, sitting beside Grandpa Walter. He wore a silver-gray suit, a small flower pinned neatly to his pocket. When our eyes met, he gave me a gentle nod, the kind that said everything without a word. I'm here. Hi. My name echoed through the loudspeaker. Olivia Hart, Juris Doctor, Harvard Law School. I rose, stepped forward, and walked to the stage. Applause filled the air, but all I could hear was my own heartbeat. The sunlight hit my face, blurring my vision. I accepted the diploma, bowed, and turned back toward the crowd. Grandpa was on his feet. Ethan too. And a handful of my closest friends around them stood, clapping loud and proud. It wasn't a crowd, but it was mine. The only people who had ever seen me from the inside out. And in that moment, I knew that was all I would ever need. Meanwhile, more than 2,000 miles away in Texas, Savannah stood on the stage of Miss Texas 2025. The lights were blinding, the crown gleamed, the audience roared. When the host announced her as the winner, my mother burst into tears and ran on stage to embrace her. You deserve this, Savannah, she cried into the microphone as music swelled. My father stood beside them, beaming, clapping, pride shining in his eyes brighter than the stage lights themselves. A perfect moment, at least, in their world. In my world, beneath the bright sun of Harvard Yard, everything was strangely silent. After the diplomas were handed out, I stepped onto the podium for my speech. My voice carried through the open air, a little shaky at first, but steadier with each word. We come from different places, some born in the spotlight, others in the shadows. But what brought us here today isn't where we started, it's where we chose to keep going. I paused, my gaze finding Grandpa, Walter, and Ethan in the crowd. Sometimes, no one shows up to cheer for you. But if you can still stand tall, that in itself is victory. Applause erupted, warm, loud, and echoing. I bowed and smiled, not for recognition, but because, for the first time in my life, I felt free. When the ceremony ended, Grandpa came forward and wrapped me in a tight embrace. He whispered in my ear, "I told you, Olivia. I'd be the one who stands when they stay seated." I laughed, holding him close. That evening, after the ceremony, Ethan and I sat by the Charles River. The city lights shimmered across the water, golden and soft, drifting like memories I hadn't touched in years. My phone buzzed. It was a message from my cousin, Emma, with a photo attached, a shot of me on stage, accepting my diploma, sunlight on my face, my hair lifted by the wind. Her caption read, "From small-town Texas to Harvard Law, she did it all alone." I stared at it for a long time, my chest tightening. Not out of sadness, but because every word was true. She did it all alone. I saved the photo without saying anything. But within hours, my phone began vibrating nonstop. Messages poured in from old classmates in Abilene, neighbors, people who once knew my family. "Is it true your mom didn't show up to your graduation? I heard Linda was at Miss Texas with Savannah." Unbelievable, Olivia. The photo spread like wildfire across local social media. Someone reposted it with the headline, "Former Miss Texas skips her daughter's Harvard graduation to attend beauty pageant." Hundreds of comments. Then thousands. Half outraged, half mocking. Small newspapers in Texas picked up the story, and community pages lit up with debate. People began talking about the Hart family. One side celebrated for beauty, the other for intellect. And asking the question that had haunted me my whole life. So, what really defines true worth? I never intended to respond. But the situation spun far beyond my control. Emma called me, her voice a mix of concern and excitement. "Olivia, everyone in town is talking about you. Some of the church ladies are even calling out Aunt Linda publicly." I stayed quiet. Part of me felt an ache, the kind that comes when private pain becomes public gossip. But another part of me felt something strange, almost peaceful. As if the universe had finally decided to speak for me, to say aloud the things I'd never had the courage to say myself. Ethan placed his hand gently on my shoulder. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded, eyes fixed on the shimmering black surface of the Charles River. "I am," I said quietly. Maybe this is just the truth finding its own way out. That night, in the stillness of Boston, I realized I had crossed a line I could never go back from. I was no longer the daughter waiting to be seen. No longer anyone's shadow. A storm was coming. I could feel it. But this time, I wasn't afraid. Because at last, I was standing in my own light. And I didn't need anyone to turn the switch on for me. The storm arrived only days after graduation. First came the messages from Abilene, then the posts flooding the town's community pages. The headline cut like a blade. Former Miss Texas Olivia Hart skips daughter's Harvard graduation to attend beauty pageant. Beneath it were hundreds of comments. Most angry, a few sarcastic. "I used to admire her, turns out family values was just makeup. Your daughter's at Harvard, and you still choose a stage over her success? Poor Olivia, that must have hurt like hell." The story spread faster than I imagined. Within a day, all of Abilene seemed to know. People whispered when they saw my father at the auto shop. Mom's church friends exchanged half smiles whenever she walked in. "She's always preaching about morals and motherhood. Well, how's that working out now?" I heard one of them say in a voice memo someone forwarded me. I didn't know who started it, and honestly, I didn't care anymore. It was simply the harvest of what they had planted long ago. On Tuesday afternoon, my phone wouldn't stop ringing. Mom. I knew this moment would come. I let it ring once. Then twice. By the third call, I finally picked up. Her voice burst through the line, trembling with fury. "Olivia, what the hell are you doing? Everyone at church is calling me a terrible mother. You've embarrassed me in front of the entire town." I held the phone to my ear, hearing her ragged breathing and faintly, the sound of a TV in the background. Probably a news segment about Savannah. I spoke slowly, clearly. "No, Mom, I didn't embarrass you. You did that yourself." There was a long, heavy silence. Then click. She hung up. I sat still for a while, staring out the window of my small Boston apartment. The sunset glowed against the glass, reflecting my face calm, strangely calm. Maybe a few years ago, I would have cried. But not now. Now, all I felt was relief. The truth had finally spoken for itself, and I hadn't needed to shout to be heard. Dad didn't call. He never did. Silence was his survival strategy, caught between two storms, my mother and me. A week passed without a word. But Emma told me people had started asking him questions at the shop. "Is your daughter the Harvard girl? Why didn't Linda go to her graduation?" He would just smile weakly and say, "Linda was busy." But according to Emma, that smile looked like a man swallowing metal. And then came Savannah. I should have known she wouldn't stay quiet. One night, a message popped up from an old friend in Texas. "You need to see this. Savannah Hart speaks out about the family scandal." In the video, Savannah sat in front of a camera, tears streaming down her face, mascara smudged. Her voice trembled. "People hate me because of her. I didn't do anything wrong, I just joined a beauty pageant. I can't control where Mom goes. But now everyone's attacking me, saying I stole my sister's spotlight. I just want to live my own life." I watched the entire thing, then quietly closed the laptop. I didn't feel angry. I just felt pity. Not for her, but for the cycle we were both trapped in. Mom had taught her that love must be earned through smiles, that worth only existed when someone else was watching. And now, when the whole world was watching, Savannah was breaking beneath the very light she'd been raised to chase. But the internet has no mercy. Under Savannah's video, thousands of comments poured in. A beauty queen family with no character. Add doubling. Imagine making it to Harvard and still being abandoned by your own mother. Pretty but heartless, just a smiling statue. Hundreds of memes followed side-by-side photos of my mother and Savannah embracing on the pageant stage next to a picture of me receiving my diploma at Harvard. The caption read, "Two worlds, two values." I became a trending topic on local forums, and soon the story spread to national sites. People shared it as an example of a generation of children abandoned for their parents' pursuit of fame. A small Boston newspaper even published an article titled, "The Harvard Girl and the Texas Crown, Two Halves of the American Dream." I read it, not feeling proud, just amused. They called me the resilient daughter, but they didn't understand what resilience really meant. To be resilient, sometimes you have to accept that no one is coming to save you. Meanwhile, my mother was unraveling. She shut down her social media, canceled all of Savannah's promotional appearances, and began calling everyone she knew to set the record straight. A former friend of hers told me later that during a church prayer meeting, Mom had broken down in tears. She said, "Everyone's misunderstanding me. I only wanted what's best for my daughters." But it was too late. People no longer saw a devoted mother, they saw a woman so consumed by image that she'd forgotten love. The Hart family had become a public spectacle. Every new photo of Savannah was flooded with angry comments. Whenever my father went out, people gave him that look, the kind that mixes pity with disbelief. And for the first time, my mother experienced what it felt like to be seen. But not in the way she had ever wanted. One night, Ethan turned to me and asked, "Do you want to call them? Maybe explain? Let them know you didn't do this on purpose?" I shook my head. No. For the first time in my life, I don't have to do anything. The truth is speaking all by itself. He looked at me for a long time, then said quietly, "I understand." I sat still, reopening the photo Emma had taken that day, me in my crimson gown, smiling softly, sunlight pouring across my face. For the first time, I noticed something I hadn't before. I wasn't alone in that picture. I had myself whole, steady, and no longer defined by anyone's approval. The storm outside might strip away their reputation, but for me, it simply washed clean what was false between us. And when the waters finally stilled, I knew I would never walk back the old road again. A week after everything exploded, I got a short message from my father. "I'm in Boston. Can I see you?" Just 6 words. But I stared at them for a long time. Part of me wanted to say no to protect what I'd finally rebuilt. Another part, the one that still remembered his quiet kindness, hesitated. In the end, I said yes. We met at a small cafe near Harvard Square. The morning was misty, Boston hushed nothing like Abilene. When I walked in, he was already sitting by the window, a cup of coffee in front of him, untouched. He looked older than I remembered. Gray streaks in his hair, calloused hands folded neatly on the table. And his eyes carried something I'd never seen before, guilt and shame tangled with tenderness. "Olivia," he began, voice rough. I didn't come here to defend anyone or to explain. I just wanted to tell you I was wrong." I stayed quiet, stirring my tea, waiting. He drew a deep breath. All my life, I was afraid of losing peace at home. I thought if I stayed silent, things would stay calm. That letting your mother have her way was the right thing to do. But I didn't realize. My silence made you feel abandoned. He paused, lowering his eyes. I chose to keep the peace instead of keeping you. I looked at him for a long time, 1,000 emotions rising and falling inside me. When I was 12, I used to dream of hearing him say those words. When I was 18, I resented him for never saying them. And now, hearing them at last, I felt nothing but emptiness. I set my cup down and said softly, but firmly, "And you lost both." He looked up, eyes wet, and didn't argue. He just nodded slowly. "I know." We sat there for a while, neither of us speaking. Outside, the maple leaves had already begun to change, even though autumn had barely started. When he finally stood, I didn't hug him, I just nodded. He gave me a faint, weary smile. "I hope, One day you'll be able to forgive, he said softly. Not for me, for yourself. Then he left. That afternoon, my phone rang again. Mom. I almost didn't answer, but in the end, I did. Her face appeared on the screen, eyes swollen, mascara smudged. Olivia, she said, voice trembling. People are saying horrible things about me. I just wanted Savannah to have the chances I never did. I didn't mean to abandon you. You know that, don't you? I was silent for a few seconds. Then I said quietly, not in anger, but with the resignation of someone who no longer needed to be understood. And I just wanted a mother. She froze. Her lips trembled, and then she began to sob. Don't say that, please. I thought I was doing the right thing. I didn't want either of you to suffer the way I did. I looked at her face through the screen. The woman who once made an entire town turn their heads, now small, fragile, exhausted. For the first time, I didn't see her with anger. I just saw a woman haunted by the illusion that love must come with recognition. That fame could replace affection. I didn't say anything more. I just nodded gently. Are you okay? She asked, as if it were one last attempt to make things right. I'm okay, I said. And you will be too, someday. But we'll never be the same again. She nodded, tears streaming down her face, and hung up. I sat in silence for a long time after that call, until there was a knock at the door. It was Grandpa Walter. He'd arrived in Boston earlier than planned, carrying a wool coat and a bag of apple pastries. I thought you could use something sweet after all those bitter days, he said with a warm chuckle. I hugged him tightly. I don't even know how I'm supposed to feel anymore, Grandpa. He sat beside me, his old, wrinkled hand wrapping around mine, steady and warm. You don't have to feel anything, Olivia, he said gently. Just remember this, forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means you stop letting them control your emotions. You stop giving them the power to hurt you again. I looked at him, then rested my head on his shoulder like a child. If I stop reacting, I whispered, won't they think I don't care? He smiled, his voice low and steady. People can think whatever they want, Olivia. But peace, he said, doesn't need an audience. We sat by the window, watching golden lights spill onto the Boston streets. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to explain or prove anything. I just felt still, a kind of quiet peace I had never known before. That night, I took the graduation invitation out of the drawer and opened it again. It didn't hurt anymore. It was just a piece of paper, nothing more, nothing less. I folded it neatly and placed it into a small wooden box, alongside the other mementos of my past. My grandfather's letter, the 16th birthday card, and the photo with my Harvard professor. Before closing the lid, I added a small note on top. No more reactions. No more need to be seen. Just live better. When I turned off the lights, Boston was quiet. Outside, yellow leaves drifted across the pavement. And I knew I had stepped into a new chapter. Not one of revenge or resentment, but of freedom. A freedom that didn't require witnesses, or applause, or anyone else's permission. Just me, whole, enough, and at peace. A year later, Boston had changed. The trees along the Charles River were full and green again. The air smelled of young grass and cool water. I still walked that same path every morning. But now, instead of rushing to class, I was heading to the small office of the Freedom Youth Foundation, where I worked as an attorney for children forced into beauty pageants, talent shows, and the kind of dreams they never chose. I had never forgotten that feeling. The pressure to become someone just to be loved. And maybe that's why, every time I helped a child return to school, or gain the right to choose their own path, I felt like I was saving a little piece of the girl I once was. At a child rights conference in New York, I was invited to speak. Standing on the stage, facing hundreds of people, I realized I wasn't trembling anymore, not like the day I stood on the podium at Harvard. I smiled, took a slow breath, and said, not every child who receives applause is happy. Some children just need to be heard. For a few seconds, the room was silent. Then came the applause, warm, steady, genuine. But this time, it didn't feel like validation. It felt like release, because finally, I had found my own voice. Not to be seen, not to be praised, but to speak for the children who still couldn't speak for themselves. After the conference, Ethan was waiting for me outside. He took my hand, his eyes soft, the kind of look that already knows the answer before the question is asked. "Olivia," he said quietly, "I don't know where life will take us, but I know you're the person I want to walk with wherever that road leads." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small box. Inside was a simple ring, catching the late afternoon sunlight. I laughed through the blur of tears and nodded. No audience. No cameras. Just two people. And a quiet promise. To keep walking together, through calm or storm. We moved into a small apartment in Cambridge, the balcony overlooking the Charles River. In the mornings, I worked. In the afternoons, Ethan cooked. In the evenings, we sat by the window and read together. I learned to slow down. To notice the small things I used to overlook. Laughter echoing through the kitchen, the warmth of a cup of tea, the faint smell of paper from unfinished case files. No more pressure to prove anything. No more waiting for impossible approval. Just peace. That quiet, priceless peace I once thought I'd never be able to touch. One winter morning, Grandpa Walter passed away in his sleep. The news came as Boston lay under a blanket of snow. I stood by the window for a long time, holding tightly to the letter he once wrote me. Forgiveness isn't forgetting, it's choosing to stop letting them control how you feel. Bye. And I realized I had lived exactly by those words. His funeral was simple, attended only by a few family members,